Welcome to People, Power, and Politics. Hard talk, riveting interviews, community updates, in-depth analysis. That's People, Power, and Politics. We tell it to you as it is. No holds barred. You are the people, you have the power. We bring you the politics. To listen to our show, be a guest, or to advertise, visit www.pppradio.nyc. That's www.pppradio.nyc.
What happens when an attorney and a psychologist comes together? We get the book, The Road to Splitsville, How to Navigate the Road to Divorce Without Making Yourself Crazy, Your Children Miserable, or Your Lawyer Wealthy, and then discover your path to happiness. A very warm welcome to everyone. Our guests are authors Attorney Jeffrey Stevens and psychologist Ronald Raymond. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much for having us.
My pleasure. So, what are you hoping for readers to get from your book?
Well, let me start with that one and say that when I had the idea for the book, it's because after decades of practice as a lawyer in New York and more recently in Connecticut, I think that we have a broken system. And when I say that, what I mean is that our system seems to be geared so that the more anguish and upset there is in the course of a divorce, the more money the lawyers make and the longer it goes on. And we all know we've either been in that experience or we have had friends who have done that. And so I decided to write a book about how to go through this journey with less pain, and immediately decided that I needed also to have the psychological aspects of it examined, the emotional aspects, one of the questions, Pearl, that you raised, the why of divorce and so forth. So I went to my good friend, Ron Raymond, who is a psychologist with decades of experience, and he agreed to co-author the book with me, and so that's how it came to be.
Yes, on my part, I had worked with thousands of families that were going through divorce, them and the couples and the children, and I just felt that there was so much anguish going on during a divorce that if there was some way that I could help by reducing a little bit of that emotional turmoil for them, that it would really be helpful. So the book was created largely on my part to try to help people go through this with less angst and less emotional turmoil.
So, gentlemen, we know that diamonds are forever, but marriages are not. How does one confront and understand the why of divorce?
Go ahead, Ron.
Okay. Well, if you know that many divorces occur because of a betrayal, and I think that's a very important part, because I think that marriages are all based on an idea that you are now with the most trusted person in the world for yourself, and suddenly you've been betrayed by some infidelity of some sort. We also find a lot of marriages having difficulty because there's a lot of arguing going on between the couple. And I think that, one of the things that we can do is try to help people understand where that's coming from and how to resolve it with a divorce, rather than just battle the issue for a long time. I've seen many families where they have held off on a divorce because of the children, and when I talk to those children, most of them say that they wish their parents had gotten divorced.
Yeah, just if I may add to that, Pearl, when Ron talks about the betrayal, the classic example is one party cheats on the other, has a boyfriend or a girlfriend or something like that, has an affair. But what we also examine in the book, and Ron does a great job of this, is all the other types of betrayal: alcoholism, abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, drug addiction, gambling addiction, spendaholics, and so forth. So from the day of marriage, when people are in love, to the day when they decide that they have to split, it could be many reasons why the marriage is broken down. But a word that Ron generally or very regularly uses is it breaks down the trust, because you expected more from your partner than what you're getting, and that's when things start to unravel.
When you were enumerating some of the reasons for difficulties in a marriage, one of the things that I found very frequently that you left out, Jeff, was lying. that one or the other members of the couple is lying about everything to the other one, and that's a real sense of betrayal, because the original, we assume that most people get married because there's a love and a trust that goes on, and once that betrayal occurs, it's very difficult to rekindle this.
Can you share some techniques for dealing with the inevitable emotional factors that you mentioned that people faced before?
Ron, that's your area.
Okay, well, I think one of the things that we need to talk a little bit about is the sense of guilt, that in most times when there's this divorce going on, the person goes through, if I only should have, if I could have, if I would have, kinds of things. And these are all useless because it places a lot of sense of guilt as if you're responsible for it. But we know it always takes two to tango. And so, yes, there is some self-blame that one has to cope with and get over. But I think the main thing in going through a divorce is to see that there is a future ahead for yourself, that this doesn't mean that this is an end to life.
Amicable or acrimonious? So, of course, whether a divorce is amicable or acrimonious, how does one choose the legal process best suited for their individual circumstances?
Well, regardless of how much tension or acrimony or mistrust there is in the relationship, as I said earlier, the one thing we have to recognize is the system is not there to help, unfortunately. The system is there to amplify the conflict. Lawyers make less money if the thing is resolved quickly, and they make more money if it goes on and on. I'm not blaming lawyers for that. It's up to the parties to decide whether or not they want to be in a position of getting this thing done in a way where they pay less in legal fees, have less anguish, have less upset for their children. And that's a choice people have to make.
Okay, so divorce can be both an emotional and financial drain. In selecting an attorney, how can one manage that relationship and limit the cost?
Well, the first thing you want to do, in my view, is you want to do as much as you can together. Go to maybe one person that you could both agree upon, that either a family attorney that you both trust, or an advisor that's recommended to you, or a mediator, somebody who's going to be completely independent, who is not going to represent either of you, and sit down and say, okay, look, we've decided we want to be divorced. This is not a marriage counseling session. This is about the split. And on the road to Splitsville, we need to handle certain things. We need to divide our assets. We need to divide our debts. We need to do something about the marital home. We need to do something about taking care of the children. And if you get somebody who's good, they could walk you through a large part of that process before you even have to go to attorneys who are going to, by definition, be adversarial with each other, supposedly on your behalf. And the point for me is that the more you could do together, the better you are, because there's no magic to this anymore, Pearl. There was a time, as we know, when there was a great stigma to divorce. It was a terrible thing. People couldn't get divorced. You needed grounds for divorce. You needed to catch your wife in a motel with your best friend and take pictures of it. You remember all those, the movies from back when about all that. Mm-hmm. Today in our country, we have almost universal no-fault divorce. So you don't even have to have a reason. You just go to the court and say, our marriage has irretrievably broken down and you're entitled to a divorce. And so the courts, forget about the lawyers, the courts view this as a business transaction. How many years were you married? How many kids do you have? Who is the big earner or the small earner? What prospects do you have for income in the future? What's your health? What's your education? There's numerous factors that go into this formula, and they throw this into the pot, and they come out and they say, this is how much each of you should get. Should there be alimony, yes or no, and so on. So there's no magic to it. So the earlier that the two of you get real about what's going to happen when you split, the less expensive it'll be, and in my experience, the less emotional it will be. Because now you're almost working together rather than making your lawyer rich. Put that money away for your kids' college. That's what you should be doing, not spending money on lawyers fighting with each other as a surrogate because one of you is mad at the other for cheating or for gambling or for lying or whatever. So I see a process where you go for lawyers after you've made the attempt to come as close as you can to resolution through somebody independent. And even when you get lawyers, you tell them, listen, you work for me. I don't want to turn this into World War III. I want to get a result here that's fair to both sides so that we can move on with our lives. So that's how I approach it.
As you were talking, Jeff, one of the things that came to my mind, Pearl, is that there are many steps to this, and I always try to help people realize that a divorce is not jumping from A to Z, but it's the whole alphabet in between that one has to go through, and a lot of that going through those steps involves coping with all of the anger that one feels about the divorce, and coping with all of the feeling that something has been lost. In many ways, a divorce can be viewed a lot like a death. After all, there is a death in something here that occurs when there's a divorce, because people originally loved each other, but now something has happened to that. So something has died and gone away.
The friendship dilemma. When going through a divorce, there is a lot of advice from well-meaning but dangerous friends who may be sleeping with your spouse. How can one navigate this?
Yes. Go ahead, Ron.
Well, what I was going to say is, in my experience in working with people, somebody always knows the right answer, and I think that that's a dangerous thing in a divorce, is to realize that you have to be listening to yourself, and that's what our book stresses, is going into really examining what went wrong with this marriage, and really looking at it in a realistic way, rather than the advice that so many of your friends, meaning well, may give you, and that is to, try to put this back together.
So,
when you go to, as Ron said, everyone thinks they know the right answer. You go to parties or you meet with people or you're having drinks with someone and they say, oh man, I know a lawyer and he'll take your husband to the cleaners, or I know a lawyer and he'll keep your wife from getting anything, and I think you should do this, that, and the other thing. But they don't really know the facts of your marriage. They're not there. They're not in the bedroom. They don't know how you got to this place. And they also don't really know your true finances or what your situation is. So you have to be true to yourself first, then try and get to some place with your partner and say, listen, there was a day somewhere in the past where we were so much in love that we actually took marital vows. And now we're divorcing. So somewhere between heaven and hell, we need to come to an agreement that's not going to hurt anybody. And in many instances, and I know you're going to want to talk about children, but in many instances you have to consider the children because they didn't ask for this. But the key is to work through what you can. And if you need help, you might need the help of a therapist. And Ron could talk about, how you choose someone, not as a marriage counselor, but as a divorce counselor. Or as I say, a mediator or an advisor who can help you get through the legal hurdles without making it totally contentious. And I know I'm repetitive when I say this, but I really worry for people because the system is really built on a lawsuit. Divorce is a lawsuit. They treat it almost like it's a contract action, but they ignore that system ignores all of the emotions that are involved. And that's what people have to be mindful of, because it is a highly emotional process. Like Ron says, it's almost like a death in the family. And so you have to be aware of that and deal with that in a way that serves you so that you can get on with your life afterwards.
And that leads me to my next question, actually. I was going to ask, how can a therapist help and how does one choose one?
Well, I think, what I thought of as Jeff was talking, not only do you have people at the party saying, I know this attorney who will take X to the cleaners and so on, they also know of a psychologist who will help them really resolve this. And I think very often that's a destructive component because it doesn't help people really look at what has died and what has gone wrong. And why we stressed in the book looking at why the marriage took place to begin with. A lot of people are marrying the wrong person for the wrong reason. And I think we really try to help people look at that so that as they move on with their life, they're not making the same mistake.
Right. That's so right. We often say, Pearl, as you know, that people who were abused as children wind up in a marriage where they're abused as a spouse. Why is that? Because that's what love looked like to them as a child, so that's the relationship they fell into. Your father was an alcoholic, and somehow you married an alcoholic. Why? Because that's what you knew. I know a woman, for example, and a very good friend. She is in her third relationship, and every one of the guys is an alcoholic. And this new one, she's trying to deny it because she doesn't want to look at it. And it's true. The guy is an alcoholic again. And until you can break that pattern, until you're honest with yourself, until, if necessary, you get the help that's required, you're going to repeat history. And that's what we don't want you to do. We want you to find that new life and that new happiness. We want to free you from what's gone before. That's the point of the book.
Kids are usually collateral damage from a divorce, the ones most affected. What is your advice to deal with young and adolescent children of divorce?
Well, let me take adolescent children, because Ron will talk, because he's really an expert on adult children. With respect to adolescent children, I handled the case one day, and the parties were going at each other, and they couldn't stop arguing, and they pretended that they were concerned about the kids. And the judge was a very smart judge. I can even say his name. His name was Judge Novak in Stamford, Connecticut. He looked down from the bench and said, "Let me tell you something, people. Children are much more resilient than you are. They're going to get past this faster than you are because they are the center of their own universe." So the key is just to recognize when you're dealing with children that they need to be assured that you're both going to continue to love them, that you're both going to continue to be in their lives, that this had nothing to do with them, and eventually they'll program this and they'll get through it. Because as you were alluding to this earlier, Pearl, about divorce, 50% of first marriages end in divorce in this country. 50%, 60% of second marriages, and 70% of third marriages, talking about repeating the same mistakes. So children no longer have to deal with the stigma, like, oh, I'm so embarrassed, I'm so ashamed, my parents are divorced. A whole bunch of the kids in school with them have parents who are divorced. So all you need to do is give them the support. Don't make them part of this process. Make them understand that they stand apart from the split of the parents, and that they are loved and they will be nurtured and supported going forward, and they'll get on with life.
I think that one of the things that I'd like to say is that so often I have seen the issue of children, adolescent children, believing that they are somehow responsible for the divorce. And this is so very important for both parents to be together on this and to let them know that they play no role at all in their responsibility for the divorce.
Okay, so looking at adult children of divorce, they get affected as well. What is your advice for them?
Well, my advice is to absolutely stay out of it, and for parents to please leave them out of it. Too often I've seen adult children involved in the issue of, mom or dad, please take my side in this, and you know what's wrong, you've lived with this. And it's an effort to try to get the adult child on your side, which is a very big danger in a marriage, divorce.
Happily ever after. The marriage starts happily ever after. Divorce, for the most part, is the opposite. How can one approach ending a marriage, the loss of love?
Well, I think Well, go ahead, Ron.
Well, I was going to say one of the big things is to get the person to see their life and to begin to love themselves, because so often that piece dwindles during a marital difficulty. And once you believe in yourself and go on to establish a new life, which I found many, many women in this situation, for example, taking on a career that they should have taken on when they were younger, but they didn't because of the marriage and the children and so on. But they have a whole new life facing them. Go ahead, Jeff. Were you going to add something to that?
And I was just going to say that in terms of the process, a couple of things. One is that you have to understand that this is not all your fault, but it's also not all your spouse's fault. It's never 100% zero. No matter how bad your husband is to the wife, no matter how bad, it's never 100% his fault. There was something that the wife did, that she was an enabler, or she created something, and maybe it's 90%, 10%. But what you have to recognize is take responsibility and then let it go. Let it go, because you still have a life. There's a next act in your life to participate in. I mean, we grew up, we were adolescents, then we came into adulthood, then we got married. If your marriage failed, think of this as the next act of your life and get it right this time. That's what we are preaching at the end of the book. And I hate to use the word preach, but it's sort of what we're doing. We're giving you guidelines and saying you can now go and be the person you want to be, do the things you want to do. whatever you felt held back about in your marriage, that doesn't exist anymore for you. And go and look for the sunshine at the end of the road, because you're not being held back anymore. You don't have this spouse who is mean to you, who's cheating on you, who's a cheapskate and won't let you spend money, who's a gambler, who's an addict, whatever it is, man or woman, it doesn't matter. Get on and don't fall into the same trap again, which is why, and I'm going to circle all the way back if you will allow me, one of the key things Ron has in the beginning of the book created this brilliant thing called a spousal attachment survey. I know he didn't invent it, but he refined it for our book. And what it really is a look at who you were, who your spouse was when you got married. And people say, why would I start there? I already know why I'm getting divorced. He's a creep or she's cheating on me or whatever. That's not the point. The point is you got from the beginning to the end of this marriage, things must have happened. And the more you understand about that, the less likely you are to make the same mistakes in your new life. And that's what you have to think about this as, a new life. And if you know what got you into trouble the first time, you'll be less likely to make the same mistakes in the future. That's really what life is about, learning from these lessons. You know, as is once said, we learn more from our failures than our successes, because when you fail, you really have to examine it and say, gosh, why did that happen? Success, we say, oh boy, that was great. So if you failed in your marriage, figure out why and don't do it again.
I think that's one of the things our book really stresses, Jeff, is to figure out why the marriage failed and to not allow it to be the base to a new relationship.
Right. Don't do it again.
I can't tell you how many times, Pearl, I have been through the situation where someone married with the idea, I can change that other person, and that you can't change another person. I think that's so important to realize, that you are marrying someone that's going to be just the way they are when you marry them.
And in many instances get worse. There's a great song in Guys and Dolls, marry the man today and change his ways tomorrow. It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Well,
no.
there's another song that says, I love you just the way you are, right?
That's Billy Joel.
Yes.
That's the
right,
point.
Right.
If you could love somebody, let me tell you something. If you could love someone just the way they are, you're probably not going to wind up divorced. It's people who want them to be different. If they have a different image and I thought you would be, I mean, how many times has Ron heard this in therapy? I thought my husband would be. As soon as you start a sentence like that, you know this person is doomed, because it's not what you thought they would be. You have to love them for who they are, and you have to let them love you for whom you are. That's the point of a great relationship. And if you're right away thinking, well, no, I want these things to be different, and I want them to change, and I know this young couple right now, they're going through a very difficult time, and he's a very outdoorsy kind of guy, and she is not. And so everything he wants to do in terms, and they have 3 sons, and everything he wants to do in terms of a vacation or a trip is exactly what she doesn't want to do. How do you think that relationship is going to work out? I mean,
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's so important to really to look at why you want the person to be different than they are, because that really looks at yourself and what's going on with you and what kind of needs and desires you have that may not be able to be met by this other person.
So therefore, so let me say a little bit more, because I want to be, if we're ending, I want to be on a more upbeat note. So when we talk about the path to happiness at the end, we're not kidding about that. And when we say that, what we mean is, maybe, as Ron said, you were a wife who was held back from a career that you can now pursue. Or maybe, as the husband, you were held back from doing things that you would like to do. I don't care if it's hunting or playing golf or becoming, a bridge player. It doesn't matter what it is. But if you're restricted in those ways because of the marriage and because of the conflict that existed, you now have an opportunity to create a whole new life for yourself and be exactly who you want to be and have the life that you want it to be. And it doesn't always have to be about a lot of money. That's not the point. I mean, there are church groups that pursue things that you want to do in life. There are community groups that pursue things. Maybe the husband maybe you live in the city, but you love to grow vegetables. I mean, gosh, I grew up in the Bronx. I mean, there are places in the worst sections of the Bronx and in Harlem and in Bed-Stuy and in other places where they actually have gardens and where you could go and volunteer your time and all that sort of thing and meet like-minded people who like to do the same thing, and that's how you move on with your life. And if you had a spouse who said, oh, my God, I don't want you doing that. That's not what I want to do. I want to go to the opera. Well, you got two people who are, shooting in the wrong direction.
But Jeff, I think it's really important to stress that none of this happens during, or at the end of the divorce unless you get off your butt and seek some of these things out.
That's right.
If you just sit there all day and cry, you're not going to get what we're looking for to develop a new life.
Very, very important, Pearl, what Ron says. You can't sit there wringing your hands about, I thought my marriage would be forever. I thought this and I thought that. Well, guess what? Guess what, mister? You were wrong. Guess what, lady? You were wrong. Now get up and go do what makes you happy, because you can do that now. And you may have the support of your children, whether they're younger or whether they're adults. They're going to be happy for you. So often, children are relieved when their parents split, getting back to the children issue, because the tension in the household is so difficult for them. I just had a couple tell their 3 children, and the kids ranged in ages from like 16 to 22 or something, 3 kids, and they were so nervous about telling them. These children were so relieved. Their reaction was, wow, it's about time, Mom and Dad. I mean, how long are you going to live like this? And the parents were just astounded that it was as if the kids were consoling them and saying, listen, go live your happiest life. We're okay. And so it's so important to move on, to move forward. Keep moving. Keep those legs moving. Keep yourself going forward, and that's how you'll find happiness.
You used the term before, Jeff. You got to let it go. You got to let go all the dreams and the hopes that got shattered, and let go of it and build new ones.
Right. Well said.
So how can one get a copy of your book?
Well, the easiest way, and by the way, I just want to say, we did it in paperback because we want it to be affordable for people. I think it's $18. It's on Amazon is the easiest way. Just look up The Road to Splitsville. My name is Jeffrey Stevens with a PH. Ronald's name is Dr. Ronald Raymond. And if you just look up The Road to Splitsville, it's there. You could have it the next day. And I will tell you this, I'm very proud to say that everyone who has read it, who's in the situation, has thanked me because it really has had an impact. The difficulty for us, Pearl, is reaching that audience because people still are a little embarrassed to admit they're getting divorced and, so whatever. So we talk to people like you, and you get the word out there, and we appreciate it very much. And if people need this help, go get the book. You won't resent it. Ron is giving you his money-back guarantee.
Yes.
Not
Thank
you, Jeff, only
I
Ron.
Ron's the rich one in the pair. No, I'm only kidding. I'm kidding about that. But,
all right.
but seriously,
thank you so much, guys.
People loved it, and I hope that they find it on Amazon.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. This was great, and I hope to have you back again.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having us on. We
God
really
bless
appreciate
everybody.
it, Pearl.
All right.
Yes,
thank
God
you.
bless. Take care. Bye, Pearl.
Bye-bye.
People, power, and politics. Hard talk, riveting interviews, community updates, in-depth analysis. That's people, power, and politics. We tell it to you as it is. No holds barred. You are the people. You have the power. We bring you the politics. To listen to our show, be a guest, or to advertise, visit www.pppradio.nyc. That's www.pppradio.nyc.